Hey, you clicked on my video. Appreciate it. Now be sure to like the video and subscribe to the page. Okay, we are now joined by Caroline Fenton. She's a fellow LSU alum, manship grad, just like me. So, we stick together. She's the
manship.
Yep, there we go. She's also the host of Locked On LSU podcast. I'm sure many of you have given her a listen. If you haven't, check her out on wherever you get your daily podcast. You can download and find her. But she's also the co-host of a radio show in Nashville, Stillman and Company, on 102.5 The Game. So we're going to talk some Tennessee football, and she's going to give a perspective because she knows a lot about, SEC football. She's in Tennessee territory, but she also knows a lot about LSU. So we're very excited to have her. Caroline, thank you so much for doing this. How are you doing?
Yeah, happy to be here. I'm great. I actually just got to New Orleans last night for the Tennessee LSU game. So spending a couple days in New Orleans and heading to Baton Rouge tomorrow. So excited for the game. Happy to be back in Louisiana. Excited for the game.
Awesome. Okay, so everybody's been asking the question about all these college football programs: USC, Texas, Miami, Tennessee. Are they back? Tennessee's had a good start to a season under previous head coaches. Most recently, Butch Jones. He was in the top 10 for one of his seasons before they kind of, went downhill after that. Jeremy Pruitt, I think, went on a nice little start to his second year. So why should I believe under Josh Heupel that this fast start is any different?
I think because, and to say like, are they back? It depends on how you define that. I don't see Tennessee winning a national title this year. I think there are way too many better teams than Tennessee in college football this year. That's no knock on Tennessee. That is just more so credit to the Alabamas, the Georgias, and the Ohio States of the world. So it depends on who you define back, because I think that's an easy thing to say is, are they back? Josh Heupel is different. One, because there's buy-in into this program. Jeremy Pruitt never really got the appreciation from the fan base, or at least when he was winning some games, when they won 8 games in a season, a lot of people thought, okay, maybe this is it. And they started to buy out very quickly. I think that this year and this fast start is different from the past because the foundation was built last year. Because Tennessee looked night and day different in 2021 and 2020. They had the very quick, high-powered offense, the up-tempo offense. They're recruiting very well. There's a lot of buy-in to Josh Heupel, not because it's just winning games, but because I think a lot of Tennessee fans see progress on the field, where maybe it didn't show up in the win-loss column, because let's not forget that Tennessee was still a 7-win team last year, but there was development being built, where they played Alabama close at the half. And then, of course, Alabama pulled away, as Alabama tends to do. They played Pitt closely, and then their starting quarterback at the beginning of last season, Joe Milton, just made poor mistakes. And then that's when Hendon Hooker came in and took over the starting job. So long-winded way of saying this year is different because the foundation was built last year, that Tennessee is not winning these games as one-offs, and it's not lucky wins. It's wins that, it's a product of the system. And also this year is different because they have the quarterback, because Hendon Hooker is just really that dude. Where in the past, where maybe LSU on the brain, Tennessee was trying to compete with some of these higher level programs, and maybe they squeaked out wins in the end with a Josh Dobbs, it was a talented quarterback, but I think Hendon Hooker just has more to offer, and the arm strength, the accuracy, the system, and also with his legs. So this year is different just because the foundation has been laid and they have the talent on this team.
Okay, so let's talk about Hendon Hooker then. He's obviously maybe the Heisman frontrunner right now. I mean, depends on who you ask. It's only October.
I don't know if I'd go that far, but Heisman dark horse, Heisman candidate, sure.
Yeah. Either way, he's playing awesome, and he's getting a lot of attention, and rightfully so. But a quarterback can't do everything, because, if he was on Vanderbilt's roster, he obviously wouldn't be as good. So having said that, I mean, it's easy to say, well, stop Hendon Hooker. But take me outside of Hendon Hooker for a second. What part of Tennessee's offensive personnel really helps get their fast-paced offense going? Like, if it's one thing that LSU say, okay, we have to stop this, just outside of just stopping Hendon Hooker, what would it have to be?
It's those wide receivers. And Tennessee runs a very interesting offense. It's not just fast. And I think there's this misconception of Tennessee's offense is fast, but it's not very complex. And I tend to disagree. While it may not be as complex as maybe perhaps some more traditional pro style offense, like what you might see from Jimbo Fisher's Texas A&M offense, it's not your traditional pro style offense, and it's maybe not as complex and doesn't have as thick of a playbook as those styles of offenses, but it's very strategic. What you might see from Tennessee is what they do is called a wide receiver stack, where they'll have two wide receivers lining up, one in front of the other, and they use them as decoys. That's how they use the running back as well. They use the running back as a blocker and also as a decoy. So look for kind of the tricky and creative ways that Josh Heupel uses his personnel, and kind of in a more untraditional way, where it might be a little bit more confusing for this LSU secondary to cover, because when you have the wide receiver stack, when you have the one wide receiver in front of the other, you don't know who it's going to, and you don't know necessarily what kind of play. It's a very difficult offense to predict. I would say overall, if anything, if you're going to take Hendon Hooker out of the offensive picture, of course, just the speed at which Tennessee plays, and also just these wide receivers are talented. Now, Cedric Tillman, their leading receiver, he's questionable for this game. He underwent ankle surgery after he had an ankle injury in the Akron game. He was out against Florida, and I thought that would have given Florida an edge. But really, I think what it showed was the depth at wide receiver that Tennessee has. You saw Ramel Keaton, who may be at, honestly, the bottom of the depth chart of the Tennessee's wide receiver depth chart. He really stepped up, and he had himself a day. You might see true freshman Squirrel White really step up. If some of Tennessee's other receivers are getting double teamed. Without Cedric Tillman, Tennessee's offense is still pretty efficient. So I would look to those wide receivers and the creative ways that Josh Heupel uses them to really give this LSU secondary some trouble.
Okay, so let's move over to the Tennessee defense then. And we'll get to Jaden Daniels in a second, but LSU has ran the ball very well against Mississippi State and Auburn, who do have nice defensive fronts. Probably the strength of Auburn's team right now, and it's the strength of Mississippi State's defense. But Tennessee statistically has a top 3 run defense in the SEC. I think they're 21st overall in the country, so it's pretty good, and they have a lot of experience at that position as well. But I'm here to ask you: is that sort of an inflated stat because the Vols' pass defense is just so bad?
Yes, it is. And it's an inflated stat for a couple of different reasons. One, Tennessee is coming off of a bye week, so they have one fewer game than the rest of the SEC. So you might look at the number of rush yards that they've given up. Well, Tennessee's going to give up fewer than any other team in the SEC because they played one fewer game. So if you look at their rankings amongst the rest of the SEC, Tennessee's probably going to be ranked higher just because they have one fewer game, at least in the defensive categories. The stunning thing is that Tennessee's still at the top of offensive categories with one fewer game. But that's one reason why the run defense is overinflated. And also because Tennessee's played one true, run heavy mobile quarterback team, and that's Florida. The other team that you could look at is Pitt, and Pitt doesn't run the ball as well as Florida does or as well as LSU does. So Tennessee's run defense still gave up 62, 64, it's 60-something rush yards to Anthony Richardson alone. So I think that run defense is a little bit overinflated. They have trouble stopping the run. The defense overall for Tennessee, I believe, is their fatal flaw. The secondary is poor. To put it lightly. And while the run defense might be the brighter spot on defense, I don't think that's necessarily, I think that compared to the rest of the SEC, I think it's overinflated. But all of that to say, Tennessee is expecting to stop the run. Josh Heupel in his press conference earlier this week said that's going to be one of our number one priorities, putting words into his mouth, is stopping Jaden Daniels, is not letting him get out of the pocket, not letting him extend plays with his legs. So Tennessee is going to be looking to stop Jaden Daniels. So with an understanding that that's what their game plan is going into this, maybe you see a better run defense, and maybe LSU is forced into more passing situations just because Tennessee's defensive number one priority is stopping Jaden Daniels first and foremost and stopping the run overall.
So let's get to Jaden Daniels then. I said I got a lot of flack from LSU fans where I said, look, I don't care what LSU's passing statistics say. I always thought it was a little overrated based on what my eyes were telling me, especially before the Auburn game, and Auburn just kind of exposed it. But every LSU fan's glimmer of hope going into this game is, well, look at what Anthony Richardson did. He had no touchdown passes all season going into Tennessee, and he throws for 400 plus yards. Keaton Slovis and that Pitt offense, they would make Les Miles proud. But they had
Cam Cameron style.
Yes, there we go. But they had success. So why not Jaden Daniels? So let's play devil's advocate against LSU's passing offense, because I don't want to sound like too much of an LSU homer. What are the qualities that Keaton Slovis and Anthony Richardson have that Jaden Daniels does not have, that made them maybe have more success than what Jaden Daniels might have Saturday?
I think I'll start with Anthony Richardson. I think what Anthony Richardson has that Jaden Daniels doesn't have is size. So if a Tennessee defensive front is putting pressure on Anthony Richardson, I think that maybe he has more of a tendency to sit back in the pocket, just understanding that he is a much more bigger body. I think Jaden Daniels, on the other hand, we saw it in the first half against Mississippi State, and really for a majority of the game against Auburn, he looked awfully skittish when he was getting pressured. And I think that's the understanding of me versus a defensive lineman, me versus their outside linebacker. They probably win every single time. Whereas Anthony Richardson is almost built kind of more like a tight end. Like, if you're going head to head, if you're Anthony Richardson, you're going head to head with a defensive lineman, it might be a little bit more of a fight. So I would say that Anthony Richardson has the size. Anthony Richardson, I would say, also can have a very strong arm and be very accurate when he wants to be. But Anthony Richardson is very hot and cold. You either see the 450 passing yards and 2 passing touchdowns against Tennessee, or you see the abysmal game overall, both passing and rushing against Kentucky. So I would say Anthony Richardson is much more hot and cold. So where Jaden Daniels has the advantage is a little bit more consistency and is much more elusive. Where Anthony Richardson could just bulldoze you, Jaden Daniels can find those small holes and kind of wiggle through those, which he did several times against Auburn. I'm stunned by some of the holes that he finds and he's able to fit through. Keaton Slovis, on the other hand, I think that he is more accurate with the deep ball. He can air the ball out 40 or 50 yards downfield. The only thing with Keaton Slovis is he has to find those perfect matchups. And to be completely honest, I've watched much more Jaden Daniels, Anthony Richardson, and Hendon Hooker football than I have watched Keaton Slovis. I'm not a USC or a Pitt fan. But just the football that I have watched from Keaton Slovis, he's a little bit more picky. He looks for those one-on-one matchups, and he looks for a much more wide open receiver where if they might be 50-50 balls, he's not going to take that risk. And so I think where Keaton Slovis found more success against Tennessee was the fact that Tennessee just doesn't have a very good secondary, where he had more of those favorable matchups because he had more wide open guys, because Tennessee's secondary wasn't able to keep up or wasn't staying man to man. But also in that same breath, I would give Jaden Daniels an advantage there because Keaton Slovis is not as elusive as Jaden Daniels or really as Anthony Richardson. He's much more of a pocket passer. He's much more of a pass first quarterback. But I would say with Keaton Slovis, it's the accuracy and it's more of a willingness to throw the ball downfield. And with Anthony Richardson, it's the size.
Would you say, and we'll move on after this, would you also say that maybe Anthony Richardson and Keaton Slovis, kind of like what Brian Kelly was saying on Monday, that they are more likely to just let it rip and they're not afraid to take some more chances? Because even when I see Anthony Richardson, he's not afraid to throw the ball. It may not always be efficient, but he's not afraid. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
I do think that's fair. And I think that's where the size aspect comes in, that Anthony Richardson feels much more confident, but because he does have much more of a bigger presence in the pocket. That's what I've seen from Jaden Daniels. And I think it was very highlighted in the Auburn game, was the apprehension to throw the ball, where, there might be an open receiver 10 to 15 yards downfield, which isn't necessarily, a reckless throw. It might be a little bit more risky than the 4 or 5 yard pitch to the tight end or the running back that Jaden Daniels prefers to defer to. But those situations where he had a wide open receiver, he didn't take them. Or the situations where, hey, we have to get a first down. We're at 3rd and long. We have to throw the ball downfield. He may not take those opportunities and defers to running the ball instead. So I do see that there's some sort of apprehension with Jaden Daniels, but we've seen Jaden Daniels take some of those risks. We've seen Jaden Daniels throw the ball downfield. I think that last week was kind of a product of the first SEC road game. a night game in Jordan-Hare. It's a tough environment to play in. So I do wonder how much of that was like kind of a mental aspect with Jaden Daniels. I think we saw it against Mississippi State too in the first half. The apprehension to throw the football. Maybe that was a product of, this is my first SEC opponent. This is the most difficult defensive front or defense overall that I've faced so far this year. So I'm afraid to throw the ball. And I think that's going to, Jaden Daniels will grow and will get over that the more SEC experience that he has. But I think that you're going to start to see more risky throws from Jaden Daniels. And I mean that in a positive way. Risky throws from Jaden Daniels. One, because Brian Kelly told you. And also two, you're back at home and he has 2 SEC games under his belt and you're only going to continue to grow and get more comfortable. And especially against a defense that is not that team's strength.
Well, let's get back to 2 more questions and I'll get you out of here.
Yeah.
LSU's defense, let's go back to them.
Mhm.
They played well against the air raid and Will Rogers.
Mhm.
Very well. Had trouble stopping Auburn and Florida State in the passing game.
Mhm.
Is LSU's defensive kryptonite a dual threat quarterback?
That's a good question. I look at each of those individual games and I can make, I don't want to use the word excuse, but maybe an explanation as to why Florida State and Auburn looked so good against this LSU defense. So with Mississippi State, I think you either know how to defend them or you don't. That's my analysis. My expert analysis is you either know how to stop the air raid or you don't know how to stop the air raid. You know what to expect with the air raid offense. I think with Florida State, that was more so this LSU team trying to figure out who they are. Really, first game of the season, let's figure out where our strengths and our weaknesses lie. I think with Auburn, the explanation as to why the passing game was so effective was because I don't think LSU expected Auburn to throw the ball that much. Brian Kelly in his press conference that earlier that week said, this is what we have to do offensively. We got to take care of the football, no dumb penalties, but overall we have to stop the run. I think they were looking at Jarquez Hunter and Tank Bigsby to carry a majority of the offensive load, whereas Robbie Ashford really took the ball into his own hands. And I think the secondary was pretty stunned by that. So I don't know if it's kryptonite is a dual threat quarterback rather than maybe they've had trouble because this is still a team that's trying to figure itself out. And when they are given something that's not expected, that's when they kind of start to take a step back. But also credit to Matt House for making those adjustments at the half. I think that's why LSU defensively at least has, they've been dominant in the first half and even more dominant in the second half is because they make those adjustments at the half.
Last question. You got a pick? You made a prediction yet?
I have. Yes, I have made my official prediction. Ultimately, first and foremost, if you're a betting person, the spread in this game is very interesting. Opened at 4.5, shrunk to 3, and now I believe it's all the way down to 2.5. So there's something that Vegas knows that we do not, because looking at the numbers, there's a lot of money coming in for Tennessee, yet the spread continues to either shrink or stay the same. So that's an interesting aspect of this here. The reason why I lean Tennessee ultimately getting this win is because Tennessee is more consistent. And I mean that in 2 different ways. Tennessee's more consistent week over week. With Tennessee, they're going to put up a lot of points. That they're going to gain a whole bunch of yards. And you know what to expect from Hendon Hooker. He can extend plays with his legs. You can use his legs and he can also use his arm because he's got a cannon of an arm. And probably that their defense is going to be more of a weaker spot. You know what to expect from Tennessee week over week. And also the second part of that is they're more consistent year over year. They have a returning head coach, returning offensive coordinator, and a returning defensive coordinator. The only change that they have on that coaching staff, the entire coaching staff, was their wide receiver coach last year left to go to the Saints, actually, and they promoted from within for their wide receiver coach. The coaching staff has consistency. The personnel has consistency. This is Hendon Hooker's second year in this offense, second year at Tennessee. Cedric Tillman is their leading receiver for the second year in a row, of course, questionable for this game, but they have so much more consistency and they have their identity and it's a very solid identity. Whereas I think LSU, entering this year with so much change in all aspects, the coaching staff, the personnel, offensive scheme, defensive scheme, all of the above, there's so much change. I think this team is still trying to find its identity, at least offensively. Now I say that where I think Tennessee is ultimately get the win. I do think it's going to be a close game. And this is not a game that's out of reach for LSU. LSU. I think LSU absolutely can win this game. If they get pressure on Hendon Hooker, if they force turnovers by creating opportunities for themselves and taking opportunities away from Tennessee, a team that likes to score a bunch of points, that can score a bunch of points, I think LSU absolutely can win this game if they just continue to get pressure on Hendon Hooker defensively. But overall, I think this Tennessee team is just a little bit too solid in its identity.
Caroline Fenton. You can follow her on Twitter at Caroline Fenton1 and listen to all her great analysis every day on Locked On LSU podcast. Wherever you get your podcast, you can listen to her. Caroline, thank you so much for coming on and talking some ball with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it. Enjoy the game.
Thanks for listening to Out of My League. If you like what you heard, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Or follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok in the description link below.